Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more psychology. Today we will be diving back into the work of Carl Jung. This is Psychology and the Occult. We will be reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition, if you find value, I ask that you do all of the wonderful things down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated, put it in the box. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you truly find value, hit me with that super thanks or super chat. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of one of my books. The first one, a series of unconventional beliefs, details my use of the electromagnetic forces of creation, the Holy Spirit, and how I use that to heal myself and how you can align yourself to do so as well. The second one, the green stone, is probably the most relevant to the study. It is my work on spiritual alchemy. I consider it to be the completion of Carl Jung's Mysterium Conjunctionis, along with his work with the archetypes. I have reworked the MBTI system into something that is less subjective, more objective. And the final one is a house built upon shifting sands. It is a biblical deconstruction of the Bible using the Bible primarily as the source. With all of that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of uh, psychology and the occult with the soul and death. I have often been asked what I believe about death, that unproblematical ending of individual existence. Death is known to us simply as the end. It is the period, often placed before the close of the sentence and followed only by memories or after effects in others. For the person concerned, however, the sand has run out of the glass. The rolling stone has come to rest. When death confronts us, life always seems like a downward flow or like a clock that has been wound up and whose eventual running down is taken for granted. We are never more convinced of this running down than when a human life comes to its end before our eyes, and the question of the meaning and worth of life never becomes more urgent or more agonizing than when we see the final breath leave a body which moments before was living. How different does the meaning of life seem to us when we see a young person striving for distant goals and shaping the future, and compare this with an incurable invalid, or with an old man who is sinking reluctantly and impotently into the grave? Youth, we should like to think, has purpose, future meaning, and value, whereas the coming to an end is only a meaningless cessation. If a young man is afraid of the world, of life, and the future, then everyone finds it regrettable, sensible, senseless, neurotic. He is considered a cowardly shirker. But when an aging person secretly shudders and is even mortally afraid at the thought that his reasonable expectation of life now amounts to only so and so many years, then we are painfully reminded of certain feelings within our own breast. We look away and turn the conversation to some other topic. The optimism with which we judge the young man fails us here. Um, I am somebody who is on the second half of life, right? I have lived half of what should be a reasonable expectation of life. Now, for me, a reasonable expectation of life is about 90, right? 80 would be even better, right? You get here, do things, have fun. Then it's time to go home before everything breaks apart and it's no longer functional. I don't want to be hanging around longer than I can do things. And so 80 to 90 is a reasonable expectation. Well, 45 is half of 90. I am 48. I'll make 49 this year. So I have reasonably surpassed half of my life. So it is a reasonable time to stop and reflect upon things. Uh, I feel like I've been doing that inadvertently the last few years. And so I'm in a fairly good place, right? I'm not in a place of dread at all. I'm not in a place of over anxiety or anything. So, uh, yeah, the optimism which we judge the young man fails us here. Uh, But the reasonable expectation of life now amounts to only so and so many years, and so I am on the backside. I have reasonably expect to have lived already more years than I can look forward to, uh, especially since I am not a fan of unnecessary extensions. Naturally, we have a stock of suitable banalities about life which we occasionally hand out to the other fellow, such as everyone must die sometime, you can't live forever, etc. But one is alone, and it is night, and so dark and still that one hears nothing and sees nothing but the thoughts which add and subtract the years, and the long row of those disagreeable facts which remorselessly indicate how far the hand of the clock has moved forward, and the slow, irresistible approach of the wall of darkness, which will eventually engulf everything I love, possess, wish for, hope for, and strive for. Then all of our profundities about life slink off into some undiscoverable hiding place, and fear envelops the sleepless one like a smothering blanket. Many young people have at bottom a panic fear of life, though at the same time they intensely desire it, and an even greater number of the aging have the same fear of death. Indeed, I have known those people who most feared life when they were young to suffer later just as much from the fear of death. When they are young, one says they have infantile resistances against the normal demands of life. I could name examples. One should really say the same thing when they are old, for they are likewise afraid of one's life's normal demands. We are so convinced that death is simply the end of the process that it does not ordinarily occur to us to conceive of death as a goal and a fulfillment, as what we do without hesitation, the aims and purposes of youthful life and its ascendants. Life is an energy process. Yes, like every energy process, it is in principle irreversible and is therefore directed towards a goal. The goal is a state of rest. In the long run, everything that happens is, as it were, no more than the initial disturbance of a perpetual state of rest which forever attempts to reestablish itself. Life is teleology par excellence. It is the intrinsic striving towards a goal, and the living organism is a system of directed aims which seek to fulfill themselves. The end of every process is its goal. All energy flow is like a runner who strives with the greatest effort and the utmost expenditure of strength to reach his goal. Youthful longing for the world and for life, for the attainment of high hopes and distant goals, is life's obvious teleological urge, which at once changes into fear of life, neurotic resistances, depressions, and phobias, if at some point it remains caught in the past, or shrinks from risk without which the unseen goal cannot be attained. With the attainment of maturity, at the zenith of biological existence, life's drive towards a goal in no wise halts. With the same intensity and irresistibility with which it strove upward before middle age, life now descends. For the goal no longer lies in the summit, but in the valley where the ascent began. The curve of life is like the parabola of a projectile, which, disturbed from its initial state of rest, rises and then returns to a state of repose. The psychological curve of life, however, refuses to conform to this law of nature. Sometimes the lack of accord begins early in the ascent. The projectile ascends biologically, but psychologically, it lags behind. We straggle behind our years, hugging our childhood as if we could not tear ourselves away. Hmm. We stop the hands of the clock and imagine that time will stand still. When, after some delay, we finally reach the summit, there again, psychologically, we settle down to rest, and although we can see ourselves sliding down the other side, we cling, if only with longing backward glances, to the peak once attained. Just as earlier fear was a deterrent to life, so now it stands in the way of death. We may even admit that fear of life held us back on the upward slope, but just because of this delay, we claim all of the more right to hold fast to the summit we have now reached. Though it may be obvious that in spite of all our resistances, now so deeply regretted, life has reasserted itself. Yet we pay no attention and keep on trying to make it stand still. Our psychology then loses its natural basis. Consciousness stays up in the air while the curve of the parabola sinks downward with ever increasing speed. Natural life is the nourishing soul of the soil. Anyone who fails to go along with life remains suspended, stiff, and rigid in midair. That is why so many people get wooden in old age. They look back and cling to the past with a secret fear of death in their hearts. They withdraw from the life process, at least psychologically, and consequently remain fixed like nostalgic pillars of salt, with vivid recollections of youth, but no living relation to the present. From the middle of life onward, only he remains vitally alive who is ready to die with life. For in the secret hour of life's midday parabola is reversed. Death is born. The second half of life does not signify ascent, unfolding, increase, exuberance, but death, since the end is its goal. The negation of life's fulfillment is synonymous with the refusal to accept its ending. Both mean both mean not wanting to live, and not wanting to live is identical with not wanting to die. Waxing and waning make one curve. That's interesting. Whenever possible, our consciousness refuses to accommodate itself to this undeniable truth. Ordinarily, we cling to our past and remain stuck in the illusion of youthfulness. Being old is highly unpopular. Nobody seems to consider that not being able to grow old is just as absurd as not being able to outgrow child sized shoes. A still infantile man of 30 is surely to be deplored, but a youthful septuagenarian, isn't that delightful? And yet both are perverse, lacking in style, psychological monstrosities. A young man who does not fight and conquer has missed the best part of his youth, and an old man who does not know how to listen to the secrets of the brooks as they tumble down from the peaks to the valleys makes no sense. He is a spiritual mummy who is nothing but a rigid relic of the past. He stands apart from life, mechanically repeating himself to the last triviality. Our relative longevity, substantiated by present day statistics, is a product of civilization. It is quite exceptional for primitive people to reach old age. For instance, when I visited primitive tribes of East Africa, I saw very few men with white hair who might have been over 60, but they were really old. They seemed to have always been old, so fully had they assimilated their age. They were exactly what they were in every respect. We are forever only more or less than we actually are. It is as if our consciousness has somehow slipped from its natural foundations and no longer knew how to get along on nature's timing. It seems as though we were suffering from a hybris or of consciousness, which fools us into believing that one's time of life is a mere illusion which can be altered according to one's desire. One asks oneself where our consciousness gets its ability to be so contrary to nature and what such arbitrariness might signify. Like a projectile flying to its goal, life ends in death. Even its ascent and zenith are only steps and means to its goal. This paradoxical formula is no more than a logical deduction from the fact that life strives towards a goal and is determined by an aim. Sorry. I do not believe that I am guilty here of playing with syllogisms. We grant goal and purpose to the ascent of life, why not to the descent? The birth of a human being is pregnant with meaning, why not death? For 20 years and more, the growing man is being prepared for the complete unfolding of his individual nature. Why should not the older man prepare himself 20 years and more for his death? Of course, with the zenith, one has obviously reached something. One is it and has it. But what is attained with death? At this point, just when it might be expected, I did not want suddenly to pull a belief out of my pocket and invite my reader to do what nobody can do, that is, believe something. I must confess that I myself could never do it either. Therefore, I shall certainly not assert now that one must believe death to be a second birth leading to a survival beyond the grave. But I can at least mention that the consensus gentium has decided views about death, unmistakably expressed in all the great religions of the world. One might even say that the majority of these religions are complicated systems of preparation for death, so much so that life, in agreement with my paradoxical formula, actually has no significance except as a preparation for the ultimate goal of death. In both the greatest living religions, Christianity and Buddhism, the meaning of existence is consummated in its end. That is definitely one of the problems. Since the Age of Enlightenment, a point of view is developed concerning the nature of religion, which, although it is typically rationalistic misconception, deserves mention because it is so widely disseminated. According to this view, all religions are something like philosophical systems, and like them are concocted out of the head. At some time, someone is supposed to have invented a god and sundry dogmas to have led humanity around by the nose with this wish fulfilling fantasy. But this opinion is contradicted by the psychological fact that the head is particularly inadequate organ when it comes to thinking of religious symbols. They do not come from the head at all, but from some other place, perhaps the heart, certainly from a deep psychic level, very little resembling consciousness, which is always only the top layer. That is why religious symbols have a distinctly revelatory character. They are usually spontaneous products of unconscious psychic activity. They are anything rather than thought up. On the contrary, in the course of the millennia, they have developed, plant like, as natural manifestations of the human psyche. Even today, we can see in individuals the spontaneous genesis of genuine and valid religious symbols springing from the unconscious like flowers of a strange species, while consciousness stands aside, perplexed, not knowing what to make of such creations. It can be ascertained without too much difficulty that in form and content, these individual symbols arise from the same unconscious mind or spirit, or whatever it may be called, as the great religions of mankind. At all events, experience shows that religions are in no sense conscious constructions, but that they arise from the natural life of the unconscious psyche and somehow give adequate expressions to it. This explains their universal distribution and their enormous influence on humanity throughout history, which would be incomprehensible if religious symbols were not at the very least truths of man's psychological nature. I know that very many people have difficulties with the word psychological. To put these critics at ease, I should like to add that no one knows what psyche is, and no one knows just as little how far into nature psyche extends. A psychological truth is therefore just as good and respectable a thing as a physical truth, which limits itself to matter as the former does to the psyche. The consensus gentium that expresses itself through the religions is, as we saw, in sympathy with my paradoxical formula. Hence, it would seem to be more in accord with the collective psyche of humanity to regard death as the fulfillment of life's meaning and as its goal in the truest sense, instead of a mere meaningless cessation. Anyone who cherishes a rationalistic opinion on this score, has isolated himself psychologically and stands opposed to his own basic human nature. The last sentence contains a fundamental truth about all neuroses, for nervous disorders consist primarily in an alienation from one's instincts, a splitting off of consciousness from certain basic facts of the psyche. Hence, rationalistic opinions come unexpectedly close to neurotic symptoms. Like these, they consist of distorted thinking, which takes the place of psychologically correct thinking. The latter kind of thinking always retains its connection with the heart, with the depths of the psyche, the taproot. For enlightenment or no enlightenment, consciousness or no consciousness, nature prepares itself for death. If we could observe and register the thoughts of a young person when he has time and leisure for daydreaming, we would discover that, aside from a few memory images, his fantasies are mainly concerned with the future. As a matter of fact, most fantasies consist of anticipations. They are, for the most part, preparatory acts, or even psychic experiences, exercises, for dealing with certain future realities. If we could make the same experiment with an aging person, without his knowledge, of course, we would naturally find, owing to his tendency to look backwards, a greater number of memory images than with a younger person. But we would also find a surprisingly large number of anticipations, including those of death. Thoughts of death pile up to an astonishing degree as the years increase. Willy nilly, the aging person prepares himself for death. That is why I think that nature herself is already preparing for the end. Objectively, it is a matter of indifference, but the individual consciousness may think about it. But subjectively, it makes an enormous difference whether consciousness keeps in step with the psyche or whether it clings to opinions of which the heart knows nothing. It is just as neurotic in old age not to focus upon the goal of death as it is in youth to repress fantasies which have to do with the future. In my rather long psychological experience, I have observed a great many people whose unconscious psychic activity was able to follow into the immediate presence of death. As a rule, the approaching end was indicated by those symbols which, in normal life, proclaim changes of psychological condition, rebirth symbols such as changes of locality, journeys, and the like. I have frequently been able to trace back for over a year in a dream series the indications of approaching death, even in cases where such thoughts were not prompted by the outward situation. Dying, therefore, has its onset long before actual death. Moreover, this often shows itself in peculiar changes of personality, which may precede death by quite a long time. On the whole, I was astonished to see how little ado the unconscious psyche makes of death. It would seem as though death were something relatively unimportant, or perhaps our psyche does not bother about what happens to the individual. But it seems that the unconscious is all the more interested in how one dies. That is, whether the attitude of consciousness is adjusted to dying or not. For example, I once had to treat a woman of 62. She was still hearty and moderately intelligent. It was not for want of brains that she was unable to understand her dreams. It was unfortunately only too clear that she did not want to understand them. Her dreams were very plain, but also very disagreeable. She had got it fixed in her head that she was a faultless mother to her children, but the children did not share this view at all. And the dreams, too, displayed a conviction very much to the contrary. I was obliged to break off the treatment after some weeks of fruitless effort because I had to leave for military service. It was during the war. In the meantime, the patient was smitten with an incurable disease, leading, after a few months, to a moribund condition which brings about the end at any moment. Most of the time, she was in a sort of delirious or somnambulistic state, and in this curious mental condition, she spontaneously resumed the analytical work. She spoke of her dreams again and acknowledged to herself everything that she had previously denied to me with the greatest vehemence, and a lot more besides. The self analytic work continued daily for several hours for about 6 weeks. That's not a bad start. At the end of this period, she had calmed herself, just like a patient during normal treatment, and then she died. From this and numerous other experiences of the kind, I must conclude that our psyche is at least not indifferent to the dying of the individual. The urge, so often seen in those who are dying, to set to rights whatever is still wrong, might point in the same direction. How these experiences are ultimately to be interpreted is a problem that exceeds the competence of an empirical science and goes beyond our intellectual capacities. For in order to reach a final conclusion, one must necessarily have had the actual experience of death. This event, unfortunately, puts the observer in a position that makes it impossible for him to give an objective account of his experiences and of the conclusions resulting therefrom. I am going to talk much more about that at the end of this. I have had a couple of near death experiences. They are somewhat different than other people's, and so it's worth discussing, but I'm going to get to it at the end. Uh, so, consciousness moves within narrow confines within the brief span of time between its beginning and its end, and shortened by about a third by periods of sleep. The life of the body lasts somewhat longer. It is always begins earlier, and very often it ceases later than consciousness. Beginning and end are unavoidable aspects of all processes. Yet, on closer examination, it is extremely difficult to see where one process ends and another begins, since events and processes, beginnings and endings, merge into each other and form, strictly speaking, an indivisible continuum. We divide the processes from one another for the sake of discrimination and understanding. knowing full well that at bottom every division is arbitrary and conventional. This procedure in no way infringes the continuum of the world process, for beginning and end are primarily necessities of conscious cognition. We may establish with reasonable certainty that an individual consciousness, as it relates to ourselves, has come to an end. But whether this means that the continuity of the psychic process is also interrupted remains doubtful, since the psyche's attachment to the brain can be affirmed with far less certitude today than it could be 50 years ago. Psychology must first digest certain parapsychological facts, which it has hardly begun to do as yet. The unconscious psyche appears to possess qualities which throw a most peculiar light on its relation to space and time. I am thinking of those spatial and temporal telepathic phenomena, which, as we know, are much easier to ignore than to explain. In this regard, science, with a few praiseworthy exceptions, has so far taken the easier path of ignoring them. I must confess, however, that the so called telepathic faculties of the psyche have caused me many a headache, for the catchword telepathy is very far from explaining anything. The limitation of consciousness in space and time is such an overwhelming reality that every occasion when this fundamental truth is broken through must rank as an event of the highest theoretical significance, for it would prove that the space time barrier can be annulled. The annulling factor would then be the psyche, and space time would attach to it at most as a relative and conditioned quality. And it's more like using a tool. Time is a tool. We live in the realm of time, and it is a tool that we have. Under certain conditions, it could even break through the barriers of space and time precisely because the quality essential to it that is, its relatively transspatial and transtemporal nature. This possible transcendence of space time, for which it seems to me there is a good deal of evidence, is of such incalculable import that it should spur the spirit of research to the greatest effort. Our present development of consciousness is, however, so backward that in general we still lack the scientific and intellectual equipment for adequately evaluating the facts of telepathy, so far as they have bearing on the nature of the psyche. I refer to this group of phenomena merely in order to point out that the psyche's attachment is to the brain. An example, its space time limitation is no longer as self evident and incontrovertible as we have hitherto been led to believe. Anyone who has the least knowledge of the parapsychological material which already exists and has been thoroughly verified will know that the so called telepathic phenomena are undeniable facts. An objective and critical survey of the available data would establish the perceptions occur as if in part there were no space, in part there were no time. Naturally, one cannot draw from this the metaphysical conclusion that in the world of things, as they are in themselves, neither time, there is neither space nor time, and that the space-time category is therefore a web into which the human mind has woven itself as into a nebulous illusion. Space and time are not only the most immediate certainties for us, they are also obvious empirically, since everything observable happens as though it occurred in space and time. In the face of this overwhelming certainty, it is understandable that reason should have the greatest difficulty in granting validity to the peculiar nature of telepathic phenomena. But anyone who does justice to the facts cannot but admit that their apparent timelessness is their most essential quality. In the last analysis, our naive perception and immediate certainty are, strictly speaking, no more than evidence of a psychological a priori form of perception, which simply rules out any other form. The fact that we are totally unable to imagine a form of existence without space and time by no means proves that such an existence is in itself impossible. And therefore, just as we cannot draw from an appearance of space timelessness any absolute conclusion about a space timeless form of existence, So we are not entitled to conclude from the apparent space time quality of our perception that there is no form of existence without space and time. It is not only permissible to doubt the absolute validity of space time perception, it is, in view of the available facts, even imperative to do so. The hypothetical possibility that the psyche touches on a form of existence outside space and time presents a scientific question mark that merits serious consideration for a long time to come. The ideas and doubts of theoretical physicists in our own day should prompt a conscious mood of psychologists, too, for philosophically considered what do we mean by the limitedness of space, if not a relativization of the space category? Something similar might easily happen to the category of time and to that of causality as well. Doubts about these matters are more warranted today than ever before. The nature of the psyche reaches into obscurities far beyond the scope of our understanding. It contains as many riddles as the universe with its galactic systems, before whose majestic configurations only a mind lacking in imagination can fail to admit its own insufficiency. This extreme uncertainty of human comprehension makes the intellectualistic hubbub not only ridiculous, but deplorably dull. If, therefore, from the needs of his own heart, or in accordance with the ancient lessons of human wisdom, or out of respect for the psychological fact that telepathic perceptions occur, anyone should draw to the conclusion that the psyche, in its deepest reaches, participates in a form of existence beyond space and time, and thus partakes of what is inadequately and symbolically described as eternity. Then critical reason could counter with no other argument than the non liquid of science. Furthermore, it would have the inestimable advantage of conforming to a bias of the human psyche, which has existed from time immemorial and is universal. Anyone who does not draw this conclusion, whether from the skepticism or rebellion from tradition, from lack of courage or inadequate psychological experience or thoughtless ignorance, stands very little chance, statistically, of becoming a pioneer of the mind, but has, instead, the indubitable certainty of coming into conflict with the truths of his blood. Now, whether these are the last resort absolute truths or not, we shall never be able to determine. It suffices that they are present in us as a bias, and we know to our cost what it means to come into unthinking conflict with these truths. It means the same thing as the conscious denial of instincts, uprootedness, disorientation, meaninglessness, and whatever else these symptoms of inferiority may be called. One of the most fatal of the sociological and psychological errors in which our time is so fruitful is the supposition that something can become entirely different all in a moment. For instance, that man can radically change his nature, or that some formula or truth might be found which would represent an entirely new beginning. I got a book. Any essential change or even a slight improvement has always been a miracle. I do not discredit that, however. Deviation from the truths of the blood beget neurotic restlessness, and we have had about enough of that these days. Restlessness begets meaninglessness, and the lack of meaning in life is a soul sickness, whose full extent and full import of our age has not yet begun to comprehend. All right, so let's talk about death, right? The soul and death. I'm going to go ahead and pop over. We're going to come back. We're going to be reading the next section. We'll be finishing up psychology and the occult today. But here recently, I've been liking to look at the consciousness, the psyche, right? The psyche is more all of it together, even the parts that you don't really use, right? The unconscious part of the psyche is a real thing. And there are four parts to the mind, right? There is the conscious, the unconscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious. Just so happens they correspond quite well with the four elements: air, fire, water, earth. And through alchemical means, we can make correlations of things that can bear relevance upon psychological understanding, right? The super conscious is the collective unconscious. It is where your memory of existence gets written and there is access to other people's, right? It is written into the hard drive, so to speak, on the computer. It is literally the hard drive itself. It is the fundamental record of the changes that have occurred. It is Earth. It is the body, the temple. Then you have the next layer up is going to be the operating system. And the operating system, like there's a wide variety of different operating systems, right? There's Windows, there's DOS, there's Linux, there's all kinds of ways that you can configure your hard drive to give you the information. But the hard drive is existent, it enables everything to happen. And then the subconscious, the very deep part that you really don't access without some real intentionality, where all of your childhood memories are written that you don't even really remember, all of the things that come out as an instinctual response, the programming, so to speak. And that's the subconscious. And that represents the potentiality, right? It is on the hard drive. The hard drive contains it. It is written on the hard drive, but it's changeable. Things can be taken from it or added to it as necessary into the programming, but that's done through the experience, right? The user makes the decisions about these things and changes them. In and of itself, the subconscious stays stasis. It is non changing of its own volition. It is the feminine aspect, the negative, the receptive, but not really active. The next step up is going to be the unconscious. It is the part that is like the desktop, the operating system that you can actually see, all of the little icons that have access to all of the information, but none of it is really in the forefront right now, except the one thing that you happen to be focusing upon. Right now, I've got Jung up, and so this window is entirely Jung. But if I close it, I've got the desktop, and the desktop has all of the little icons. They're just sitting there waiting kind of for me to need them as the deciding agent. They are the facilitator of change. When you see the icon and you click on the icon as the deciding person, that agent of change is activated. It draws from the subconscious the information that it needs to display to the conscious mind through the lens of the unconscious. That's going to be the masculine aspect, the white, the positive, the part that mixes, the part that changes things. And then you get the deciding agent. That is the part that fills the vessel. That is the part that makes the decisions. It's the cursor on the screen. It is the part that points at the icon on the desktop and says, I need this information. And then it's the part that changes the information with the keyboard and says, that's not correct. This is the new part, right? And then it saves it through the unconscious all the way down into the subconscious, and it's written on the hard drive, which maintains the record of it in perpetuity. Those same fundamentals is how I really view existence. Now, if it's a simulation, doesn't bear any real meaning to me, right? We are simulated by the will of God. It is that simple for me. And so I don't have the problems that some people will with having the direct correlation to computing, especially in the age of AI. But AI is a good example of that because AI is a facilitator. It is an agent of change. It is not really the stasis agent. It is the masculine spirit, but it's not the soul. It doesn't get to make the decisions for anything. It's a tool that we can use, much like all the rest of the tools that we use every single day as we evolve in our species. Now, I believe that everything is created. I believe that there is a creator and that he created everything for the experience of being everything. Before the beginning, there was God, or there was, before the beginning, there was God, and God was infinite and without form, the void. Everything was potential, but nothing was created. And then God decided to create and limited himself from the infinite void into the finite creation. Now, I call that creation the Holy Spirit. It is every single proton in existence, but not yet combined into any greater elements. They are just a static field, a potential that could be. And then God spoke and said, I am the light. And he became the light. And when God became the light, the creation began. It went from that moment of stasis where everything was created, but not yet moving or combined or making new things, and it started to move. The word of God moved creation and became the light. And the light was good, and the light was the creation. And the light began to accrete, and the accretion became the planets, and the planets formed water, and water became life through the miraculous intention of the Creator. I believe that we are here as an extension of the divine will. Everything is an expression of the divine will. And we are individualized users of the computer. We each have our own account on the computer, and we get to make our own decisions about what gets saved to the hard drive. That desktop is ours. That operating system, that is ours. We get to decide what goes on there. We get to decide what no longer serves us. We are the deciding agent, and everything else is a facilitator, or it's the record of the change. We are extensions of God. I believe that God is the source outside of the creation, and that we are inside of the creation at the direct will of God, and that when we are done in this vessel, we just return to God. Now, whether that is as an individualized soul, or if it is we are returned to God to be reassigned as a different soul or the same soul in a different incarnation, those things aren't relevant, right? To me, the importance is that you do the best that you can here to live according to the will of God as you feel it in yourself. You know the law of God. It is written on your heart. You don't want anybody to be unkind to you. You should be kind to other people. You don't want people to treat you as though you are not human. You should treat everyone as though you are in union. You don't want to overconsume, right? It makes you unhealthy. So you should be moderate, right? And you know the laws. You know the things that you should do. It is already written. You just ignore the voice that is telling you that. We are here to be the best expressions, the best iterations of ourselves that we can possibly be. But we are free to choose wrongly. And because of that, the punishment that other people perceive, I don't. I mean, God gave you the option to choose. And if you choose wrong, he's not exactly happy, right? But that's assigning an emotion to God that he may or may not hold. I believe that we are meant to have the best, to do the best, to seek the best, but that we are tempted to do the opposite continuously, and that we, as the deciding agent, have to make a decision about that all of the time. None of that is relevant to being punished on the other side of existence, right? You are here to have an experience, and the bad experiences are still experiences. You learn something even if you don't really learn it while you're still here. I mean, if the lesson's repeating, you haven't learned the lesson, but I mean, they're still going to keep giving it to you. You're still going to be learning it. You're just learning that you're not wanting to fulfill it. Anyway, I'm getting off. Like I'm out on a ramble. Let's go ahead and talk about the near death experiences because that is relevant to this as well. I mean, one of the reasons that I am so adamant that there is a creation is because I have been knocked outside of the vessel. Right? I have had 3 near death experiences. The first one, I was probably 4 to 5 years old. I was on a party barge. I took off my life jacket. Everybody else was jumping into the river. I jumped into the river and I drowned. Oh, I got caught under a log. My stepfather jumped in. He got me out, but I was already outside of the vessel. Right? I was watching myself float under the log, watch myself be pulled out and put on the party barge, and then I made the decision to get back into the vessel, and that's when I woke up. There was no point of light over there saying, come here. There was no entity trying to wrap me up or grab me by the hand. I was a 5-year-old kid that is well inside of the age of innocence. There was nobody telling me you've got to make this decision, but I did have to make a decision, right? I did have to decide to get back into the vessel. And it's really interesting. Like I think back through time, and the origin story. And that was right after that is really when all of my things kicked off, right? That was when the molestation happened. That's when the abuse began. Like all of it was right after that particular experience. The second one, I was about 8 years old. I was on a slide, a playground slide, and it was probably 10 to 15 foot tall, but I was 8. And the neighbor kid, he was a dickhead and he pushed me off. He wanted to slide. He didn't want me to be up there and he pushed me off. I landed flat on my ass and I got knocked out of the vessel again. The vessel got up. It was screaming and crying. It was running around and I was watching it happen from outside of it. Again, there was no light, there was no nothing, but it was again a decision that I had to make to get back into the vessel. And then the third one was when I was in the Navy. Like I did a dummy, and I didn't like. I'm pretty sure they told me the fire ops was going on. I just thought I had time to go out and smoke a cigarette before they lit it off. And I opened the door, and I opened it about that much, and the big gun, the 5-inch 54, went off, and it slammed the door, and it knocked me about 30 feet down the peepay, 20 to 30 feet, back against the bulkhead. Like, and I was again outside of the vessel. And the exact same thing. Again, no nothing telling me, hey, look, here's death or anything like that. But I did have to decide to get back into the vessel. So I consider those to be near-death experiences because I'm fully convinced that if I did not decide to get back into the vessel, then it would have been done, right? And so that is not a usual one, right? I could be out there trying to sell that story, right? That's not what I'm trying to do here. We're discussing the soul and psychology. And one of the reasons why I am so convinced that there is a soul is because of those experiences. That's not even taking into account the out of body experiences, which was a whole different type of experience, right? That was me outside of my body, not by my own volition. It was not me choosing to get back in. There was no sense of immediacy or urgency or any of those things where the other ones there kind of was. And so those were two different types of experiences completely. And the point of bringing it in here is because of that, I do believe that there is something that's filling the vessel, right? Something that is making the decisions for this. And I believe that that is the soul. I believe that that is synonymous with the ego, that it is synonymous with the conscious mind, that it should be synonymous with the psyche, but the psyche really is a little bit bigger of a concept than that. And so I just wanted to point that out because it did come up in the text and it is relevant to the thing. And it's not a story that I tell very often. It's really not. So, because I don't want it to become about those things. Right. When I'm telling those stories, I want it to be relevant to the situation. I'm not trying to like you can get on tours, like you can go out there and be like, I had a near-death experience, and you can sell it to people. It's not what I'm about. I did have several near-death experiences, but it's not about trying to do that. So, all right, let's get back into the text. We're gonna we'll be getting through this today. Psychology and spiritualism. And I'm sure a lot of that last rant is going to bear into this, but I haven't read through these. I do know that it's short enough to fit inside of the window I got. So. The reader should not casually lay this book aside on discovering that it is about invisibles, that is to say, about spirits, on the assumption that it belongs to the literature of spiritualism. These are forwards, like several of these. This is the last one that I'm going to do, but there's like 3 or 4 more in this particular volume where he did forwards for other people's works. I don't know that I made that clear when we got to this part, but all right. One can very well read the book without resorting to any such hypothesis or theory and take it simply as a report of psychological facts or a continuous series of communications from the unconscious, which is, indeed, what it is really about. Even spirits appear to be psychic phenomena whose origins lie in the unconscious. At all events, the invisibles, who are the source of information in this book, are shadowy personifications of unconscious contents, conforming to the rule that activated portions of the unconscious assume the character of personalities when they are perceived by the conscious mind. For this reason, the voices heard by the insane seem to belong to definite personalities who can often be identified, and personal intentions are attributed to them. And in fact, if the observer is able, though this is not always easy, to collect together a fair number of these verbal hallucinations, he will discover in them something very like motives and intentions of a personal character. The same is true to an even greater degree of the controls and mediumistic seances who make the communications. Everything in our psyche has to begin with a personal character, and one must push one's investigations very far before one comes across elements that are no longer personal. The I or we of these communications has a merely grammatical significance and is never proof of the existence of a spirit, but only of a physical presence of the medium or mediums. In dealing with proofs of identity, such as are offered in this book, one must remember that proofs of this kind would seem to be theoretically impossible considering the enormous number of possible sources of error. We know for a certainty that the unconscious is capable of subliminal perceptions and is a treasure house of lost time and space, wait, of lost memories. I was about to say, how'd you lose time and space? In addition, it has been proved by experiment that time and space are relative for the unconscious, so that the unconscious perception, not being impeded by the space time barrier, can obtain experiences to which the conscious mind has no access. In this connection, I would refer to the experiments conducted at Duke University and other places. Considering all this, the proof of identity seems to be a forlorn hope, in theory anyway. In practice, however, things are rather different because cases actually occur which are so overwhelmingly impressive that they are absolutely convincing to those concerned. Even though our critical arguments may cast doubt on every single case, there is not a single argument that could prove that spirits do not exist. In this regard, therefore, we must rest content with a non liquid. Those who are convinced of the reality of spirits should know that this is a subjective opinion which can be attacked on any number of grounds. That is true. Right? I believe in the entities. They can be attacked on any number of grounds. It has been a subjective experience entirely. So those those who are not convinced should beware of naively assuming that the whole question of spirits and ghosts has been settled and that all manifestations of this kind are meaningless swindles. Most of them are, but not all of them. This is not so at all. The phenomena exist in their own right, regardless of the way they are interpreted, and it is beyond all doubt that they are genuine manifestations of the unconscious. The communications of spirits are statements about the unconscious psyche, provided that they are really spontaneous and are not cooked up by the conscious mind. They have this in common with dreams, for dreams too are statements about the unconscious, which is why the psychotherapist uses them as a first class source of information. The unobstructed universe may therefore be regarded as offering valuable information about the unconscious and its ways. It differs very favorably from the usual run of spiritualistic communications, in that it eschews all edifying verbiage and concentrates instead on certain general ideas. This pleasing difference may be attributable to the happy circumstance that the real begetter of the book is the medium, Betty, the deceased wife of the author. It is her spirit that pervades the book. We are familiar with her personality from Mr. White's earlier books, and we know how great an educative influence she had on all those around her, constellating in their unconscious all the things that come to light in these communications. The educative intention behind Betty's activity does not differ essentially from the general tenor of spiritualistic literature. The spirits strive to develop man's consciousness and to unite it with the unconscious. And Betty, on her own admission, pursues the same aim. So in this case, right? Using the analogy I used earlier, this would be like the programs on the desktop opening by themselves, right? Hey, look at this, right? That would be what the spirits are doing is opening the program in the unconscious that you are already aware of, even if you aren't aware that you're aware of it. It is interesting to note that the beginnings of American spiritualism coincided with the growth of scientific materialism in the middle of the 19th century. Spiritualism, in all its forms, therefore, has a compensatory significance, nor should it be forgotten that a number of highly competent scientists, doctors, and philosophers have vouched for the truth of certain phenomena which demonstrate the very peculiar effect the psyche has upon matter, the observer effect, for one. Not then, but now. Among them were Frederick Zollner, William Crookes, Alfred Richet, Camille Flammarion, Giovanni Schiaparelli, Sir Oliver Lodge, and our Zurich physicist Eugene Bleuler. Sorry. Not to mention a large number of less well known names. Although I have not distinguished myself by any original researches in this field, I do not hesitate to declare that I have observed a sufficient number of such phenomena to be completely convinced of their reality. To me, they are inexplicable, and I am, therefore, unable to decide in favor of any of the usual interpretations. Although I do not wish to prejudice the reader of this book, I cannot refrain from drawing attention to some of the issues it raises. What, above all, seems to be, to me, worth mentioning, especially in view of the fact that the author has no knowledge of modern psychology, is that the invisibles favor an energetic conception of the psyche, which has much in common with recent psychological findings. The analogy is to be found in the idea of frequency. Now, there's something to that. But here we come upon a difference that should not be overlooked. Whereas the psychologists suppose that consciousness has a higher energy than the unconscious, the invisibles attribute to the spirit of the departed, in example, to a personified unconscious content, a higher frequency than to the living psyche. One should not, however, attach too much importance to the fact that the concept of energy is made use of in both cases, since this is a fundamental category of thought in all the modern sciences. You are an electric individual. We live in a plasma universe. These are realities. The invisibles further assert that our world of consciousness and the beyond together form a single cosmos, with the result that the dead are not in a different place from the living. There is only a difference in their frequencies, which might be likened to the revolutions of a propeller. At low speeds, the blades are visible, but at high speeds, they disappear. In psychological terms, this would mean that the conscious and the unconscious psyche are one, but are separated by different amounts of energy. Science can agree with this statement, although it cannot accept the claim that the unconscious possesses a higher energy, since this is not borne out by experience. According to the invisibles, the beyond is the same cosmos, but without the limitations imposed on mortal man by space and time. Hence, it is called the unobstructed universe. Our world is contained in this higher order and owes its existence principally to the fact that the corporeal man has a low frequency, thanks to which the limiting factors of space and time become operative. The world without limitations is called orthos, which means the right and true world. This tells us clearly enough what kind of significance is imputed to the beyond. Though it must be emphasized that this does not imply a devaluation of our world. I am reminded of the philosophical riddle which my Arab dragon man asked me when visiting the tomb of the caliphs in Cairo. Which which man is the cleverer one? The one who builds his house where he will be for the longest time, or the one who builds it where he will be only temporarily? Waynes. Betty is in no doubt that this limited life should be lived as fully as possible because the attainment of maximum consciousness while still in the world is an essential condition for the coming life in the orthos. She is thus in agreement only with the general trend, not only with the general trend of spiritualistic philosophy, but also with Plato, who regarded philosophy as a preparation for death. Modern psychology can affirm that for so many people, this problem arises in the second half of life, when the unconscious often makes itself felt in a very insistent way. The unconscious is the land of dreams, and according to the primitive view, the land of dreams is also the land of the dead and of the ancestors. From all we know about it, the unconscious does in fact seem to be relatively independent of space and time, nor does there nor is there anything objectionable in the idea that consciousness is surrounded by the sea of the unconscious. That is the desktop cursor analogy. Just as the world is contained in orthos, the unconscious is of unknown extent and is possibly of greater importance than consciousness. At any rate, the role which consciousness plays in the life of primitives and primates is insignificant compared with that of the unconscious. The events in our modern world, as we see humanity blindly staggering from one catastrophe to the next, are not calculated to strengthen anyone's belief in the value of consciousness and the freedom of will. Consciousness should, of course, be of supreme importance, for it is the only guarantee of freedom, and alone makes it possible for us to avoid disaster. But this, it seems, must remain for the present a pious hope. That is my hope, right? To help people who attain consciousness. Betty's aim is to extend consciousness as far as possible by uniting it with orthos. To this end, it must be trained to listen to the unconscious psyche in order to bring about the collaboration of the invisibles. The aims of modern psychotherapy are similar. It too endeavors to compensate the one sidedness and narrowness of the conscious mind by deepening its knowledge of the unconscious. I think I sunk 12 hours into Terraria yesterday. Never really played it back in the day. Why do crafting base building games have no base defense? I never really played Terraria. Like I started it, I didn't get far, and I got annoyed and I quit. Same thing with Dwarf Fortress. I did not get far in Dwarf Fortress at all. I am not built for that game. Better than Minecraft, at least. I don't know. Minecraft and Breath of the Wild are so boring for me. Bruh, I have been playing, like, I actually have it up. Let me see if I can share it. I don't know if I can. Let me see if I can share it for you. Uh, where would it be? Video file. Oh, never mind. I would have to stop this. I've been playing this game called Vintage Story, and it's like Minecraft for adults. That's the way I like to look at it. Oh, it's 8-bit graphics like Minecraft, but it is so much more infinitely complicated. Like, if you play Minecraft and it's boring, like this game is anything but boring, right? You have to feed yourself. It's a plot, it's survival, right? But there are seasons, there is crop rotation, there's different levels of fertility in the soil. You can make compost, you can take your bread, you got to make a kern to turn it into take grain and turn it into flour, which you then make bread out of once you get clay and make an oven. Like so complicated. And I spend way too much time in that game. Like way too much time. Yeah. Like, I like it because I can stop whenever I want to. Like, I used to play MMOs a lot, but you can't just pause an MMO, and my life consists of getting up and doing things for other people a lot. And so, uh, but yeah, it is a very simple game. It is. It did what I use it for more than anything, like, is a background noise. Like, I'll have a video playing over here, and I'll have a game that I'm playing, and then I'm thinking about building my game, or I'm thinking about the mechanics of this stuff, or I'm working through some other stuff, and I've got two different distractions going on so that my unconscious or subconscious can get it out there in the right way. Uh, and that really is a main focus of why I play it a lot. Like it's just background noise for me mostly. but it is still fun and complicated and challenging at the same time. It's great. All right. The similarity of aim should not, however, lead us to overlook a profound difference of viewpoint. The psychology of the Betty books differs in no essential respect from the primitive view of the world, where the contents of the unconscious are all projected into external objects. What appears to be to the primitive to be a spirit may, on a more conscious level, be an abstract thought, just as the gods of antiquity turned into philosophical ideas at the beginning of our era. This primitive projection of psychological factors is common to both spiritualism and theosophy. What theosophy? The advantage of projection is obvious. The projected content is visibly there in the object and calls for no further reflection. But since the projection does bring the unconscious a bit nearer to consciousness, it is, at least, better than nothing. Mr. White's book certainly makes us think, but the kind of thinking it caters to is not psychological, it is mechanicistic. And this is of little help when we are faced with the task of integrating projections. Mechanistic thinking is one of the many Americanisms that stamp the book as a typical product and leave no one in doubt as to its origin. But it is well worth getting to know this side of the American psyche, for the world will hear a great deal more of it in times to come. And that was the truth. All right. Uh, the name of the game is Vintage Story. And now I am done. And so I can take, let me do this. I can take this off of the stage and then I can add, well, maybe not. Hmm. Well, maybe if I do that, now I can, I'm going to try and get it up here for you. Hold on. Let's see if we can make it work. Yeah, right there. All right. Now I got to pop it back up. But, oh, wait, hold on. It won't let me do it because the video close or the game closes out. It's tabbed open right now, right? But if I open it up on this screen over here and I try to click share screen over here, it won't let me do it. Let's try. Let's see if this works. Huh. There's got to be a way to make this happen. There's got to be a way. Like it's popping up. But if I click it, oh, you're annoying. Hey, there we go. Awesome. So this is Vintage Story right here, right? This game is so incredibly complicated. And like when I tell you that I do mindless shit while I'm playing this game, I'm gonna show you just how mindless this is. Because it's kind of ridiculous what I've been doing. But I've been clearing out a 64 by 64 block that deep, right? It's like 100 and something things deep. But in order to do it, like you gotta go make pickaxes and you gotta do food and all of this. I'll just do this. I'll go ahead and I cheat, right? I am a cheater in this game because it is an enormous time sink if you do not cheat in this game. Uh, but like this is my base. Like all of this is food. Let me turn this off. Uh, yeah. Like this is my base, and this is all fruit bushes. I got fruit trees growing down there. There's fruit bushes over here. I got crops growing over here. But like there are different types of crops, different moisture levels. Like this game is so very complicated. Like this is all low fertility ground right here. If you look at the top, it says low fertility and is moist because it's next to this. And it's got 75% right here. But if I move over here to this one, it's down to 50% because it's two away from there. And you can improve soil qualities and you can find different types of soil. Like this is terra preta, which you have to make it. It's only available if you make it. And it is just so incredibly complicated, but it's beautiful for an 8-bit game. And it is so good. Right? And like I'll sit there And like I'm literally sitting here. Well, you can't see it because of the fog. Let me get down here. And I'm just sitting down here and I'm mindlessly doing this, and I'm thinking about the subconscious and the unconscious interactions. Like that's what I do. I just sit here and I'm pounding on these freaking blocks. And it's in this shape, right? Because you can cut these out, and if you make it where it's empty space, you get all the blocks to use as other blocks. And so it's just like the mindless, but like it's an incredibly complicated game. And I cheat at it to get my fun. And I have turned off almost all of the hard stuff, right? They have this whole system where you get random storms that bring in massive mobs, and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that I just don't even play with because it was too complicated for me. Uh, but it's fun, right? I spend so much time just kicking around other stuff, and this just lets me do my thing. Uh, like I write books, and then like I'll play this, and then I got a tab over here, and I'll stop playing, and I'll write a paragraph or two. It's crazy. Yeah, yeah, and it's mainly about convenience. Like this game is so like I cannot even stress how hard, like complicated this is, because like let's look. We'll do this. I'm gonna pull up my cheats. All right, we'll go to the all good things, right? Now, this is so I can find the metals in the world, right? These are just like that's iron, there's bismuth, there's zinc, copper, uh, pretty much any of the metals you can think about. And each of them serve a different purpose. You got to have at least copper to break stone. You got to have at least bronze to be able to mine iron. Like there's levels of progression that you got to work through. But all of these little blocks right here is cheating, right? All of these little things that you can see is me cheating through mods. What you're supposed to do is build this little pickaxe. And then you go to the pickaxe and you go right here and you knock a spot. And then you go up here and you knock a spot. And then you come over here and you knock. I just took out my. And it tells you the likelihood of this particular chunk to create any one particular ore. It doesn't tell you how close you are to it. It doesn't tell you, right? It says, oh, this has a 50% chance to create copper. And so you have to make the decision whether or not you're going to take the chance to dig a hole to try to find copper out here. And it's spread around like it's an enormous time sink. It is so much that I just cheat by finding the ore. And then you can use it to find the raw materials to cook with and all of the things too. And so I really do that. And this doesn't have any of that. Like that's the only thing. Like, my base is ridiculously simple. It is open. Like I was building doors, but I've discovered that if you're building up, you really don't have to worry about it a whole lot once you civilize, and your base just doesn't get attacked. You, however, will get attacked a lot. There's a lot of death in this game. There's wolves and bears, and they are incredibly aggressive, and they are incredibly powerful, and they will just destroy you. Like it's not even a thought. Yeah. Now this, like, let me show you this right here, because this is one of the wonderful things about this game, and it's a great way to show it, right? These barrels right here all represent a different part of the leather working process. This right here is lime water, and what you do is you skin your animals, and there are different size pelts. There is small, medium, large, and giant. The small ones it takes 25, the medium ones it takes like 15 or 12. Large it takes 8, and the giant I think it takes 2. I don't ever hardly get those. But you take your amount of whatever and you stick it in lime water for the first preparation stage. And it has to sit inside of here in a sealed barrel for 72 hours, I think, game time. And when you're done with that, then you have to go to a weak tannin, which is water with specifically either oak or I forget what the other one is you can use because I use oak all of the time. But there's only two woods that you can use. They have to soak in the water overnight. Then you have to make strong tannin, which is repeating that process for 2 nights. Ah, and then you can take your prepared lime water and you can create a hide with it that you can put in here. But first, you have to scrape it with a knife. Then you can sit it in here and you can seal it. And then when it's done here, you move it up to the strong and you can seal that. And it's got to be in there for 4.5 days. When you're done with it, you've got leather, and you can use leather for a variety of things. One of the things that I use it for is armor, and then you can take these and repair your armor, which I have been needing to do for a long time now. Ah, but like you can make complicated armor sets, and you can make all kinds of stuff. And like these barrels over here, they're all making compost so that I can make terra preta. You've got to take bones and grind down bones in order to make the terra preta. You've got to create charcoal from wood, right? I've got this over here is my charcoal facility. These two little buildings down here, you take wood, you stack them in there, you seal it up, you light it on fire, and you make charcoal. Like incredibly complicated chemical processes. You've got to make hydrogen sulfide for some things. You can make gunpowder. You've got to mine nitrogen. You got to get saltpeter. Like you've got to get all of the ingredients. It is incredibly complicated, but so much fun. There are a few games that really think about bases and the player. Scanner tech to find things and base defense tech. I feel you on that. Like a zombie Minecraft survival. Like you could probably get a team together and mod that. Like this game started out as a Minecraft mod, and now it's its own separate thing entirely. Like all the artwork has changed and everything. But this team was just mods. That's it. And they're from Britain. And like I think this was like $17 for this game. And it like I've got like 300 and something hours on this map, and this was like my eighth or ninth map. Like you gotta all of these lamps, like I'm holding these lanterns right here. In order to make these lanterns, you got to mine quartz and make glass. You've got to mine copper and tin or zinc, copper and zinc to make bronze. And then you can make bronze ingots and use those bronze ingots in addition with a candle, which you have to make from harvesting flax and getting flax fibers and taking beehives and beeswax and making candles in a pot. And then you can combine all of that and you get to make uh, a lantern. And like it tells you how to make all of the things. It's all in here. But yeah, it's so much fun. But I do spend a lot of time in that game. I was really expecting uh to spend more time going through the psychology. Like I'm really out of topics to talk about right now. So I don't want to dive into the archetypes yet. I can't get too tied into anything else too much. Uh so I'll just hang out for a little bit, I guess, and we can bullshit for a minute and then I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Uh I've been getting some movement on the game though. Like the last couple of days, like I've got the overall scope of it wrote out, but I need to like really sit down and write it out. And so getting the individual pieces of how it's going to fall. Uh, I guess I'm not going to do make your own character. It's going to be the single player, right? You are this person. And I would like it to be more open world than it's probably going to wind up being. Yeah. Like, and it's better these days. Like I was playing Minecraft, but Minecraft pissed me off because they're woke, right? Yeah, I don't want to log into a game and have a header screen telling me, something about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't want that. I don't want that in my entertainment at all. I consume enough of that in my news content willfully. I find it absolutely abominable that Mojang puts that into their flash screen for their game. And so I was looking for an alternative for it. Uh, Not that diversity is bad, but the DEI is terrible. The making your judgments based solely upon melanin levels or gender is stupid. And to encourage that in any way is equally stupid. And so I really I hated that. Microcell. I'm not familiar with that word. Microcell. Like they've improved the graphics and the amount of stuff that's in there. Uh, but it just I couldn't do it anymore. I had to stop. And my next project, like when I dive back into like what I'm doing over on my Vintage Story right now is really just digging down the base, right? I'm taking this whole 64 by 64 chunk all the way down to base level. And then uh from there, I'm going to take all of the materials that I got and I'm going to start building a pyramid all the way up to the top. Uh because I like building pyramids. And so I'm going to do that. Yeah, it really is. Like there is nothing wrong with a diversity of ideas. There's nothing wrong with a diversity of genetics. There's nothing wrong with diversity in general. It is the forcing of the diversity that is the problem, right? Giving not to the best qualified person, but instead to this person because they fit a quota is racist. I know it was helping to overcome some stuff when they enacted it, but that's really not a problem like it used to be for a good reason. It should die away completely. But the forcing of the quotas is really causing more problems than it's solving these days. Micro slop. Okay. Yeah. And that when Microsoft bought it was when it was started going downhill. Uh like I'm not smart enough to do Linux, so I use Windows. But if not, like if I have a choice about a Microsoft product, I don't use Word, I don't use Excel, I don't use any of their stuff. I use Open Office for all of my creative stuff or GIMP. I've got Audacity for sound editing and uh I use Caden Live for my video editing. Like all of my stuff is free open source stuff, like Blender, UE, like everything I use is Creative Commons. Um which is like when I put my books out and they are for sale, but they're available free through the playlist. That's part of the Creative Commons type thing. Like I want it available. I want people to be able to see it, even if they don't have $20 to spend to support the channel. I want them to be able to know what's going on. Um, are they on track to ruin Fable? I hadn't even paid it. Like I'm very narrow. Like I'm a dork, but I'm a very narrow dork. Like I played a lot of Final Fantasy. I played Ultima Online. I played World of Warcraft fairly exclusively for like a decade. And so I missed a lot of the other stuff that people have as foundationals. Like I never played Fable. I know what it is conceptually, but I've never played the game. Yeah. It is wild that petty corporate bureaucratic culture has taken over progressivism. It's communist to start with. And that is the whole problem, right? I'm a communalismist, right? I want us to live communally, which means taking care of your neighbors in the way that they need to be, not necessarily the way that they want to be. So if they're not working, they don't eat, right? That's that's how it should be. But if they're unable to work, you can help them eat, right? That's communalism. That's us working as a community to make sure that we are going where we need to go. And that's what I promote. Communism is a whole different thing, right? That's the government telling you how to run everything, and that's fucking stupid. Like anybody that believes communism can work or universal health care, they've never had to deal with the US military or the VA system, right? The US military is communism, right? Every you get paid, you are your individual, but you're really not an individual. You are part of the unit. You are the comrade. You are under the orders of the specific person who is in charge. Yes, we fight for liberty, but it is under specific directions, not at our own. Right? That is very far removed from self-determination, which is where communism is at. And so it is an example of communism. Another one, one that works in the free market is the Amish, right? The Amish work very well as a communist society. They share all of their resources. They have assigned their land proportionate to the family responsibilities. They help each other and do all of the things exactly like a communist would. They operate within our free system, and that is the only way that it can work. But they do operate a working communist system. And there are a few other ones that work as well, but it only works on a small scale. The more people you get involved, the less likely it is to work, the more likely it is to be corrupted. That's why I like the small unit version of it, which is communalism. Uh, but you get the same problem with scale with capitalism. The larger it gets, the less it cares about the individual constituents, and that causes the exploitation that we see from the third world countries where we ship off our manufacturing to keep our prices low while they're still starving, but slightly less so. Uh, and it really needs to be more, yes, trade globally, but make sure that you are doing you to the best of you. You can't have communal anything via a centralized standpoint. That's the problem. Socialism is a return to rule by nobles. Communism is ancient slave empire, and it's no wonder they fail. Yeah, basically, right? Like it really was a revelation to me when I was doing the book that Joshua or Joseph enacted the first role of socialism, right? He got the state to buy all of the assets from the people up to and including their lives, and then they were property of the state for the rest of their lives, living at the will and the dole of the state. That is exactly socialism, and that was Joseph, right? He didn't save nobody; he sold them into slavery. And then you see, um, there was an example of communism, and I can't pull it out right now. Crap, I can't pull it out. I'm man. What was it? Oh, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And I got that from Jasher, so it's not reliable, right? But they were like in the book of Jasher, they were when the angels went into Sodom and Gomorrah, well, it wasn't even the angels, it was just random people. And they were like, we're going to take all of your stuff and we're going to give it to whoever we want in the way that we want to. And I'm like, oh, well, that's communism. You can centralize rules, but the more complex they are, the more you sacrifice everything to maintain the system. That is true as well. And on the socialism point too, like that is literally feudalism, right? You have one person in charge of the state who allows other people to at the will of the state to operate if they cooperate, right? It is selection. It might be fascism, but there's hmm, like feudalism is the noble is in charge of all of the serfs or the landed people, but even the landed people are there at the discretion of the nobles, right? So the state is really in control of all of the things, and it's not quite communism because you do get some amount of profit sharing, so it's more along the lines of socialism. It's a lot less militaristic than fascism would be, but fascism and socialism really do overlap a little bit. So, uh, yeah, like I would have to draw the graph out again and go through it because you can graph it, right? Like the 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 political control systems operate on the graph of self versus state and determine self determine or free market versus controlled, right? With self and free market being libertarian, when state and control being communist, where you have state and free market is fascism, and state and control market is socialism. Oh, fascism. Well, I would have to draw it out again. just to keep it right. But you can graph it out, and there every single governmental system plays out inside of that axis. More like aristocracy is ruled by a few. Fascism is born from socialism. It makes the noble class disposable for the needs of the state. Like fascism is socialism with the air that they are capitalist, right? When the fascist says, okay, you specifically get to run this store, right? You specifically get to succeed. That's fascism. That's using the power of the state to suppress the free market, and determined due to allegiance or whatever it is, the specific winners. Whereas socialism is more of a let the pieces fall where they may with the state in full control. Yeah. But like the state is in full control, right? Socialism is the state is, and communism is the state is everybody. Socialism is the state is this one guy, right? That's the matrix of the self versus tribe there. The market difference in fascism and socialism is moot. Exactly. That's why they have the argument about Hitler being fascist or socialist, right? He called himself socialist. They wanted him to be labeled fascist because they changed the definition, but he literally acted like a socialist. Power is so centralized it is all a wash. Yeah. And that's the main thing, right? Not to get to the point where everybody is completely doing their own thing, but as localized as we can possibly make it. Right? That was the goal of the Constitution. Right? That's the point of limiting the powers of the federal, was so that it could be on the smallest possible level. Right? If we could do that on the city level, that would be better, but that's a lot harder. The state is there to protect your rights. And that is from either people here or people out there trying to take your rights. That is the only real function of it, right? Protect the people is protecting your rights. And so that's the only real function of the government. It's not to save you from yourself at all. It's not to be a safety net, although I agree with most of the safety nets, if not the application of them. Like I don't have any problem with taking care of people. I think that it should be more local than it is. But other than that, like we should be taking care of people. I mean, I exist on a safety net. Like social security disability allow my family to live while I couldn't walk. So uh that is a real thing. But I guess I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping this one up. I got an inspector coming to check on my roof, so I gotta make sure everything's good outside. We should be getting a new roof due to hail damage, but we'll see how it goes. So, hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to some somewhat difficult topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. We'll be back tomorrow with the archetypes, right? That's where we'll be going next is the archetypes and the collective unconscious. I believe that's the name of the next one. And we'll be diving into more of that. We'll be discussing some of the MBTI stuff as we go along. Psychology and the occult was more of a read into the record, right? It was a lot of case study and his speculations, and that's good, right? I expanded a little bit on some of the things, but for the most part, I'm trying to hold that towards Ion, right? Most of the discussion that we're going to be doing in more detail will be in Ion, where he has his stuff fleshed out better, and my stuff will probably be fleshed out a little bit better too, so that we can make them work together. The biggest mistake America did was to allow non-landowners to vote. I'm very much getting on board with that point of view, right? Not necessarily as a bar to entry for itself, but so that you have a vested interest in the outcome, right? I believe it was, hell, was it Socrates? No, it was during Greece, I think, when they said when the people figure out that they can vote themselves money, then it will be hopelessly corrupt, and that's where we are at. Social aid is okay, but again, centralized rules and everything. And yeah, and that's the problem is application, right? The government is horribly inefficient. We know that. And so we should make it a little, the smaller the scale is, the more the efficiency can work. Right? You lose efficiency at scale in an almost impossible entropy to overcome. The amount of bureaucracy that gets created for paperwork, the more you add departments, is just overwhelming. And getting back, like that's what I wanted Doge to do. Get back to the fundamentals. These are the people that we need to run the thing to ensure that it is being applied correctly, and then get rid of the fat. I know we pay a lot of people to work, and that's going to cause a whole market issue. Like we could really do an entire live stream one day about the market issues that are coming, right? Inflation is coming to roost. It's better, right? It is so much better after the last year than it was and the direction that it was going, but it's still there. And we have adjustments that have to be made on a consumer level that as a people, we're just unwilling to talk about. And so that is the thing that we could definitely get into. Uh, Ion is a fun read. Can't wait. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that one. Like that was the one right before the Mysterium Conjunctionis, and I had a lot of fun. Like I got a lot out of the Conjunctionis. Diving into the source material for that didn't give me nearly as much as working through Young did. And so I'm really looking forward to Ion, but I wanted to get these out of the way first. Psychology and the Occult is now out of the way, and we'll be doing Archetypes in the Collective, which is relatively short. It's only 56 pages long. That might only be tomorrow. It depends on how it plays out. And so I'll be back tomorrow at 8. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Give me throw a comment whether you agree or disagree with anything that is stated. Put it in the box, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have found value, or if you truly find value, hit me with the super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of any of my books, or reaching out to me through the links provided down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you were here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been pittstake. Peace.